Hey,
Hey,
Renee, my colleague Hans Holmberg is logged on now.
oh, good.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. How are you?
Good
I'm so
evening.
glad you're with.
Happy to be here.
And who is Hans Holmberg?
Well,
He's that guy
well,
right there.
When I
right
did the
here.
introduction, you know.
Well,
Okay,
yeah.
we'll wait till the introductions to the talk.
Correct. Thank you.
And
Um,
say, Craig, you are going, I made you co-host so you can screen share when it comes time. Are you the only one that needs to share screen?
Yes, yep, I'll click through Hans's slide for him, so.
Okay.
well, we'll wait a minute or two more before we start the meeting.
Yeah.
And
Hey, Dan,
Dawn-
I'm on. It's Wendell. I'm on.
Oh, we can start now then.
Oh, yeah, right.
Oh, there it goes.
There it goes, but
Hey, John, I've got two screens up, one on top of the other one. Is that correct? I've got a PowerPoint on top of something up. Okay. Whoop, no, I still have two.
I don't have that.
I don't have that.
I can't X on it. It's just showing.
Oh, yeah, you do. You have two screens on top of each other.
Yes.
Look up in that
Show
right
one
hand
of
corner.
One, it looks like one's ours and one's the PowerPoint.
That's fine. We can see what we need to see.
Okay. We're good. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't.
Well, I guess John, we might as well put up the meeting agenda and call this meeting to order.
Okay. Do you see it?
Wendell, by the way, before we start, we are giving Sahan that full amount he requested for that wood duck box
Yes. And I voted yes.
project. Yeah, we had a quorum of yes votes. So he's going to get with Arthur and give Arthur what he needs, and then we'll get him the money. Okay, let's call this meeting to order. We've had our pre-meeting social gathering, such as it was. And introduction and welcome. Hi, everybody. Welcome.
Hi.
You can see who everybody is. There's only 16 of us signed in right now, apparently.
17 is one coming.
Okay. Yeah, this pandemic has not helped us much with our general meetings. Oh, I know what I wanted to say. Stop, John, I wanted to ask you, I sent out to everybody an email that contained a link to the North Texas Giving Day graphic and marketing materials, not nice logos and such. Okay.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah, and Arthur looks like Ernest Hemingway is signing in. Arthur has already put up a nice thing on our website, and we need to put up something also on our Facebook page.
Okay, I'll take care of that.
Yeah, Victoria could do it, but she's not here. So I'm telling you, there's lots of nice materials you can use at that website link I gave. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, back to the agenda. Committee reports. Now Victoria's not here. Who is her second in command on the Conservation Eco Action Committee? It's is it Karen Milam? No. Who is it? Are you here? Conservation Eco Action Committee, second in command?
I don't know
No.
that I'm second in command, but she sent a long report out about I was
Yeah.
on the call. Remember the the Garland issue?
Yeah, she always sends out a summary of what has gone on that we get before this meeting, but you know, it's nice to, now we have 20. We're getting up to where
Oh, that's
we
good.
usually are. Well, Renee, you're no longer, are you still part of the Conservation / Eco Action Committee?
I'm still part of the committee.
Okay, but you don't know anything more than what Victoria put in that newsletter, right?
No, because I was on that call and we just kind of listened. Remember the one she wanted us for support? I was there listening to the different EPA, and they talked about arsenic in the soil, and basically it was
Yeah.
very similar to what Lane Plating went through, where they're saying, you know, defining what contamination is. It was not, to me, there's not anything new. We just need to keep working and, you know, watching, and the water, the creek, he talked about the creek, the water in that creek having issues, but somebody point blank asked, would you let your child play in that creek? And we got a moment of silence for it. And it was a roundabout answer, I thought, but not a yes or no.
Well, that's not unusual with the EPA.
No, it's not. And for people who had never been on a call like that with the EPA, I think it was eye-opening for them to see some of the dancing around that went on.
Well, you know, they're not really always looking for more work. You know what I mean? Anyway, there was a very nice report in the Dallas Morning News the other morning about that very Garland situation. And so I think that'll put a little bit more, I don't know how many of you saw that. Did any of you see
Rita
that?
told me about it.
Yeah, it was a nice story on that. And that's going to put a little bit more pressure on the EPA. But anyway, they've already committed to clean that site up, that Garland site. Okay, John, you have enlarged I've got it cut off.
That's better. We lost an inch on one
Okay.
side. Now it's back.
Now it's back. So Wendell, you want to say something about your volunteer and fundraising?
I would love
committee?
to, Dan, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for hanging in with all of us on the Zoom calls. Just for the people who have not been at the XCOM meetings, it was we're just now getting direction from the National Sierra Club about what we're going to be able to open up and what we're not going to be able to open up. Of course, that's all subject to change, but we're hoping that we maybe can have in-person meetings this fall, possibly. So, and of course, outings, I think if I don't know if you don't have outings on the list, but Liz or somebody else or Arthur can tell us the latest on outings. But I do know it's some kind of a phased reopening for all of the Sierra Club activities. And of course, volunteer, you know, mostly requires in person, but I think Victoria and Renee are showing us very clearly that we can still volunteer. We can still be involved, even though we have, even though we have to be virtual. On the fundraising, yes, North Texas Giving Day is coming up very quick. I think that's the quickest way to make some donations to your Dallas Sierra Club. So everyone, when the day comes, be sure to be online and give money and designate Dallas Sierra Club. The other thing that's happening on membership and sort of on volunteering is our collaboration with Green Source on the Air is set for Thursday, August 19th, starting at 6 o'clock. There'll be links on the Dallas Sierra Club website or newsletter, but the excitement about August 19th is that we're going to have Margie Haley, one of our longtime, most incredible activists, is going to be the guest on the August 19th, and that's going to be about women in the environmental movement. And Margie's going to be interviewed, and she's going to give us some great insight. And that is sponsored by not only Dallas Sierra Club, but it's going to be led by Dallas College. So Dallas College is taking the lead on the August 19th Green Source on the Air. So that's what I have, and everybody just keep hanging in there. We'll get back to being in person hopefully someday.
Who from Dallas College will be on? Wendell?
Georgianne Moss is going to be the moderator. So that's going to allow Victoria and I to sort of be in the background, but Georgianne is putting together the guests and the subject matter. Georgianne is the head of sustainability for all 7 campuses of Dallas College. She is also an amazing activist and supporter of Dallas Sierra Club and Green Source on the Air. So it's going to be a good night. We'll have a good visit with several different guests that night.
Okay, thanks, Wendell. Has David Griggs checked in?
David's leaving town tomorrow, so I suspect he may be running either late or not be with us tonight. I don't think he has any emergency updates in the political world.
Okay, no, right now, not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, well, if he shows up later, we'll give him a chance to say something. Liz Whelan, have anything to say about?
Hey, everybody. I would just encourage anyone that wants to get involved with our outdoor programs to be sure to be signed up for our outings e-news, which is just the monthly newsletter. It only goes out once a month, but we're trying to be sure to include information of these little bits and pieces of our reopening as soon as we can. And so do that. We're working on getting our leaders certified again, because a lot of everybody's first aid and requirements that we have expired during the term of the pandemic. So we're just kind of doing that behind the scenes things. We have scheduled, I've got a facility and scheduled leader training for January for those that are newly interested in becoming leaders. And that's another thing, a reason for signing up for the outdoor e-news. So Mark can be sure to let you know, and obviously, and also let him know or me know that you're interested. And also I wrote a little piece in the last monthly newsletter about our outreach program, about ICO. We're gonna need more volunteers to get that started up again. It'll depend on the schools. We'll be looking for schools to work, or groups of at-risk youth or kids that are without us wouldn't have the opportunities. We're going to be looking to bring in some new groups. So, and also obviously going to need the volunteers to make that happen. So I wrote up a little thing in the newsletter. You can go back. There's some explanation and information in that. Also, my contact information is there and on our website. I'd be happy to answer any questions or talk to anybody about it if they're interested. We're just really going to be needing some more adult volunteers to move forward. So I invite anybody interested that thinks it's not a lot of time commitment at all. It's maybe a couple of Saturdays in the fall and a couple Saturdays in the spring. We basically just do as much or as little as we have volunteers to make it happen. So it's a great warm your heart kind of way to get some kids outside that without us wouldn't have that chance. And I think we all know the value of getting outside and into nature. So I invite anybody interested to let me know.
Liz, the guidance from National for ICO does not differ from the outings committee guidance, does it?
It is not different, but there's going to be more layers to it, which we're still waiting on. Because we work with kids, because kids aren't vaccinated, things like that. So it's just going to be a little tricky, but also we generally will transport the kids in a rental van, which means we're all in one enclosed space. We may need to make some changes with that. So it's just a little more complicated because we're working with kids and have to get the schools and the groups and the parents' permissions and just make sure everybody's safe as along with all of our volunteers. Most of what we will be doing to start out is just going out on a Saturday. We won't be doing any camping right away.
Okay, and Yeah, things are going to be in a dynamic state for quite some time because I think National is going to have to respond to this surge in the Delta variant, and it's not going to be what we want to hear, but we'll have to wait and find out.
Yeah, we're kind of in hold, but at the same time, I'm trying to take little, baby steps to wherever I can to get us so that we're can kind of
Yeah.
start back up.
Okay, thank
Thank
you,
you,
Liz. John, we can move on to the next slide in your deck, please.
Oh, that's it.
That's it?
Well, yeah.
Nothing else?
We can go back to the original.
Go back to the original, yeah. Well, anyway, at this point, and I don't know, that doesn't help. At this point, I think that we are ready, don't you, Renee, to introduce our
Oh,
speakers
yes.
for tonight?
Yes, I'm ready.
So let's do that. We're going to our program now.
Okay, for everyone here, thank you for joining us tonight. You have a standing invitation. My name is Renee Robertson. I'm one of the co-chairs for Program Director. Victoria Howard is the other co-chair, and she could be with us tonight, but she does a lot of tremendous work. She just couldn't be with us tonight. And she and I searched the globe for interesting and informative speakers who make this fun. And we have two such gentlemen with us tonight. Craig Taylor is a water resource engineer at Limno Tech. He specializes in natural water systems. He will answer questions and speak about the hydraulic water cycle, Texas hydrology, and contaminated transport. He has a colleague with him who will be a co-presenter. His name is Hans Holmberg, and his specialty is Superfund sites. If you don't know anything about a Superfund site, this is an opportunity to learn what that means. It has nothing to do with Superman, it's just the opposite. So we're gonna get started.
Thank you, Renee. I just want to start out by saying thank you so much for inviting us. It's always exciting to get out and talk to people about water and the environment. It's something Hans and I both really love, and having opportunities to talk to people about it and spread the word is a real treat. So let me try that. So we work for a company called Limno Tech. They've been around for a little over 40 years now. We started out as a water quality firm, specializing in modeling lakes in particular. And that's kind of grown just through passion and desire into a group of people who all care about water and water in the environment. So Renee gave you my title, but who I am is really, I'm just the guy who loves water. I've always lived in communities that have strong connections to the water. And I specialize in environmental restoration because it gives other communities those opportunities to build stronger connections with the water. Hans, I can let you introduce yourself quick.
Sure. I'm Hans Holmberg, and again, thanks for the opportunity to be with you this evening. Hope what we share you find helpful and valuable. And I'm in this business just like Craig because I have a passion for water. This is my youngest daughter, Lily, and myself out canoeing through the Boundary Waters on the Minnesota-Canadian border. And that's what got me into this business. And I do a wide variety of water resources work, including working with contaminated sites in the Superfund program. And been with Limno Tech, a fabulous company, been there 25 years. And we just bring, as Craig mentioned, a great group of people who really care about restoring and protecting our water resources.
Thank you. So the topics for today, we've retooled them a little bit. I'm going to focus more generally on just water movement and how it moves through the environment, where a lot of common contaminants come from and how they move through the environment. And then I'll pass it over to Hans, who's really more of the specialist to talk about remediation in general and why it's important. So starting all the way at the beginning, here's an image of the water cycle. So it all starts with the ocean, water evaporates from the surface. It's stored in the clouds in the upper atmosphere, and then it rains. And when that rain strikes the earth, what we see is all the runoff, right? We see the lakes and the streams and the rivers. But a good portion of that water is infiltrating into the ground and passing through. And so we think of them as underground rivers, right? They're not open flowing, but they still move like very slow moving rivers. So if we think about this and dial into this runoff case, if this is the landscape, we think about water striking the ground from the rain and it running off, right? That's what we see, that's what gets our feet wet. But actually, before water can run off, it starts soaking into the ground, and it's only when the ground is saturated with water that it starts to run off. So, and then from there, the seepage will continue on down through the soils until it gets to the groundwater table. And then much like following the land slope, the groundwater will generally flow down towards a stream or a lake and then make its way back out to the ocean. And depending on the land cover, you get more runoff versus more infiltration, or vice versa. So in a natural system, roughly 50% of the water that falls on the landscape ends up in the ground. And then the other 50 either runs off or is evaporated. If you start adding more development, those numbers shift. So in a residential area, a rural residential area, those numbers might be closer to 40% infiltrating. Can't see it here, but in a deep urban environment, you may only have 10 to 15% of that water finding its way into the groundwater. So this is really important if you care about things like drinking water from wells. If you're dependent on wells and there's not enough infiltration, your wells can go dry. And it's also really important for our streams. Streams flow when it's not raining because of these groundwater feeds. It's called base flow. And if we have large urban developments, we have less base flow and our streams tend to dry up more frequently. So generally, where contaminants come from, there's 4 or 5 different categories that I'd like everyone to think about. One is, they come from us, just things we need, things we use. Pretty much all of the nasty compounds in our stormwater runoff are things that we used to find in brakes and brake pads. But tires, cars in general just produce a lot of contamination. But there's other things like detergents. The phosphate that was in detergents became a real problem. Pharmaceuticals, everything we flush ends up finding its way out into the environment. And then like nonstick cooking surface, all the PFAS and PFOA compounds are new emerging contaminants. Beyond that, there's plenty of legal applications of contaminants in the environment. Things like pesticides and road salt, which you guys don't need a whole lot of. But these are both contaminants that we are directly applying in the environment. And we do that because we need them as a society. Another more unfortunate one is leaky storage tanks and leaky landfills. Real common is gasoline storage tanks. They end up rusting out, leaking contaminants directly into the groundwater. Landfills are another common one. Growing up, there's a landfill across the street from my house. When they were filling the landfill, they actually breached the barrier underneath, and it seeped volatile organic compounds into the groundwater. And those compounds actually showed up in the drinking water in my childhood home. And we had to live off bottled water for about 7 years. And that's really where I started thinking about water and why it's important. And then just the other source is illicit discharges, right? There's some people who just don't care and are going to dump chemicals into the environment because it's cheaper. And there's other people like Cousin Eddie who just don't know better. And it used to be common practice to drive your car up on the curb, take out the oil drain plug, and just drain your oil directly into the gutter. And there's people who don't know that's not an okay practice anymore. And then the last one is there's a lot of compounds that we're using that we just don't know are hazardous contaminants. DDT is a great example, right? Everyone knows how widely spread it was used. And it wasn't until years later that they truly understood the consequences of it. PFAS, these are the like the nonstick cookware type products. Those are a new emerging compound. They've been around for decades, and we're only just now in the last few years understanding just how dangerous they are. And other things like mercury. A lot of people played with mercury in school growing up, and they didn't know the hazardous side effects of them. So back to the general water flow chart. If we think about a contaminant that's spread on the ground, I'm showing a leaky tank here, but really through any of the applications, when it rains, those first few drops of water, which are going to infiltrate, are going to take those contaminants from the surface and just start pushing them into the soils underneath. And then once those soils are saturated, they will start to be carried off the landscape into our surface waters, our storm waters, and then directly into our streams. So if you're working with a hazardous compound, good practices are to do it on top of paved surfaces and have secondary containment so that they can't leak into the ground. But if it's just a leaky storage tank or something that's intentionally applied, that first drop of rain is going to push it into the subsurface. And from there, the only place for it to go is down. So the question is, how long will a contaminant remain in the environment? And part of that depends on the compounds. Some break down very quickly. Most of the ones that we're concerned about break down quite slowly in the environment. And how long they hang around then depends on how quickly water flows through the system. So if we're talking about surface runoff, like our stormwater, that will tend to flush through in a few hours to a few days before it's out of the system. Now, there might be contaminants that aren't picked up in that first runoff, but that the contaminant that's in the water will move through in a couple of days. Once it seeps into the soil and it's just kind of working its way down, that might take a few days to a few weeks, right at the surface, and then to work its way all the way down from the surface into the groundwater. That could be a few years to a few decades. And then, like I said before, groundwater moves quite slowly relative to surface water. So once your surface water is or your groundwater is contaminated, it can take decades or centuries for that water to move through the system and work its way out. In Minneapolis, I'll talk about Minneapolis because that's where I was trained in groundwater issues. They have 7 layers of groundwater or aquifers underneath, and that deepest one, it slopes up slowly, and from Minneapolis, Minnesota, it finally reaches the surface in North Dakota. So rainfall that infiltrates in North Dakota will eventually work its way under the city of Minneapolis. And that process takes over 1,000 years. So you can imagine if you contaminate that groundwater in North Dakota, it'll be 1,000 years before we see it in Minneapolis. And then that groundwater will work its way towards the streams and daylight. And once it's in the stream, it usually pushes through in a few days to a few weeks. So you mentioned you're talking to the EPA about monitoring the stream for contamination. That lag could be a long time from the time it was initially spilt on the ground. And from there, I think I'll hand it over to Hans for a more detailed look.
Thanks, Craig. So Craig has given us a good general background on movement of water through the environment, and if contaminants are present, then how that water works to move the contaminants through the environment. And that plays out at any of these thousands of contaminated sites that we have across the country. And Superfund came about when kind of the reckoning in the 70s that we had a lot of toxic waste dumps to deal with. And it looks like many of you were around that time and probably remember Love Canal in Niagara Falls was really a shocking discovery to understand that toxic waste had been inappropriately stored and disposed of and were contaminating through the mechanisms that Craig mentioned, contaminating the surface water, contaminating the groundwater. Whole neighborhoods had to be displaced because of the contamination. And Congress, in response to the need to address these contaminated sites, passed the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, acronym CERCLA, and Superfund is the nickname for CERCLA. So CERCLA is the more technical name. And it is just like it says, it's meant to address as across the country, these contaminated sites, respond to the environmental risks at those sites, a means to have the responsible parties help compensate for the investigation and the cleanup of those sites and hold them liable for the damage that was done. And so those parties are forced to either take the lead on the investigation and pay for the investigation and the cleanup, or if they don't take the lead, EPA will take the lead and do that themselves. In some cases, the responsible party no longer exists. They've a variety of things that can happen to those responsible parties, anywhere from closing business, death, filing bankruptcy, skipping the country. They're all over the place. And when there's not a responsible party, then EPA again steps in, leads the cleanup, and there's a funding mechanism, federal funding mechanism to help fund those cleanups. Next slide. So the general goals of Superfund are to protect human health and the environment, make the responsible parties pay, hold them liable for the contamination that's present. It's very focused on making sure the community has a voice in the process, in understanding the issues and offering feedback on a potential solution. And then the goal is to take these contaminated sites, clean them up to a level that then they can be reused for some constructive purpose and provide some benefit after the cleanup. And that's another opportunity where the communities can really have a strong say in the path forward and helping to identify how they'd like to see the site reused. Next slide, please. So the process of Superfund starts here on the left, where contamination at a site is initially identified. And then it moves left to right through these steps in the process. There's a preliminary assessment done. Inspectors will go out, samples may be taken, and if the contamination and the risks are severe enough, it's scored and ranked against other sites across the country. And if it ranks high enough in the risk, then it's put on the national priorities list and becomes a Superfund site. If it doesn't make the list, there are other mechanisms still to address the contamination at that site. Often it's the state government will lead those efforts, but it's not put into the same process as the other Superfund sites. So once it's on the priority list or the Superfund list, also called the NPL, then it's a much more intensive process to understand the level of contamination at the site, the types of pollutants, and the pathways that contaminant will be transported through the site, potentially off the site, and then what might be exposed to that contamination, who or what wildlife might be exposed to that contamination as it moves through the environment. And so that process, site characterization, or it's also called the remedial investigation, and then the feasibility study. Remedial investigation to really understand the site, feasibility study to understand what we can do about the site. Then based on the output of the feasibility study, EPA, potentially working with those responsible parties, will select the path forward. How are we going to clean up this site? And it's put into a record of decision, which is a court-ordered document to follow through with that selected remedy. That remedy then moves through design to understand exactly how much soil needs to be excavated, how much groundwater needs to be cleaned up, what the right technologies are to clean up those contaminants. Once the design is completed, then it moves to action, where the work actually gets done. And it can be quite a long process to get to remedial action. After remedial action, there's reviews every 5 years to document that the cleanup was effective. There may be needs to continue to operate treatment facilities at the site, but eventually the hope is the site's been remediated, the contaminant levels are below the thresholds that would cause an unacceptable risk, and then you can remove the site off the NPL list and reuse the site. So next slide, thanks. So we're going to talk more specifically about the Lane Plating Superfund site in the southwest side of Dallas. It's outlined in the red here in this diagram. The Trinity River is a couple of miles to the east or to the right of the facility. And it operated as an electroplating facility for about 90 years. And electroplating is the process of attaching a finish or a coating to parts, whether think of a chrome bumper, that chrome on the bumper was added to the bumper through an electroplating process potentially, or your faucets may have been electroplated to receive that finish. That process involves, of course, the use of a lot of metals in the process to adhere to the object or device you want to electroplate, and a lot of solutions, because it's done in a bath. You submerge the part in a bath with a certain solution of the metals you want attached, and then you electrically charge it to attain the finish you desire. Those baths and metals are important to be disposed of properly. In 2010, an initial investigation was made of lane plating. There was a number of issues identified, some fines were issued. They went back and revisited, additional fines were assessed, and lo and behold, in 2015, the company had filed for bankruptcy. And that basically is a way out of being held responsible for the contamination there and the cleanup that's needed. The contaminated sources at this facility, improper disposal led to contamination in the soil. Sumps where they collected the fluids and waste from the process contained contamination and leaked into the soil and the shallow groundwater. And also they containerized some of the waste in drums and tanks, but those weren't handled properly. The main contaminants of concern at this site include metals, and primarily hexavalent chromium and lead are two of the key ones of concern. Also arsenic, cyanide, and Craig mentioned PFOS. That's another contaminant of concern here. The pathways, similar to what Craig described, those contaminants got into the soil, they got into the shallow groundwater, they've moved potentially into the surface water, small creeks to the south and to the east of the facility. And then air is another pathway, potentially either by kicking up dust and particulate distribution of the contaminants, or in some cases, not at lane plating, but vaporization. If it's a volatile compound, that's a concern that can vaporize into the air and then be inhaled. And then you look at the risks. Who's at risk due to these contaminants going through these pathways? And in this case, concerns about both human health and the ecology. Next slide. So I mentioned in the business filed bankruptcy in 2015. TCEQ moved in and did a limited removal, which included most of the containerized waste, the tanks, the drums that were there. They properly disposed of those off-site. Additional investigations were then made by EPA, and sufficient that ranking came out, the contaminants, the exposure pathways were high enough that the site found its way onto the NPL listing. So it became a Superfund site at that time. Without a responsible party to take the lead, EPA took the lead, and in 2019 and 2020 performed the remedial investigation. So we've moved across that flow chart to the site characterization, the first part of it, the remedial investigation. And that's where we're at now with lane plating. The remedial investigation is out for public notice. And the EPA will take comments on that and then move forward with the feasibility study to figure out how to finish the cleanup at this site. Next slide.
Hans, I would like to mention we have about 5 minutes left if we want to leave room for questions at the end.
Okay, yeah, just briefly, as a result of the remedial investigation, you look at the concentration distribution of the contaminants at the site. high hexavalent chromium right in the heart of the site, but it does spread out across the site. Next slide. This is a diagram depicting the different pathways from the site. This is from the remedial investigation for lane plating. And it shows the yellow arrow showing surface runoff from the site towards the stream, and it shows the yellow arrow down through the soil into the shallow groundwater at the site. So the same kind of pathways that Craig described are in play here at lane plating. Next slide. The key ones that came out of the key mechanisms and pathways that came out of the remedial investigation include the surface water flow, leaching to groundwater, and in terms of air inhalation, it's really the particulates, since we don't have volatile compounds here. And then how they would impact human health is through ingestion of or dermal contact, skin contact with the soil. Again, inhalation of the particulates, potentially ingestion or skin contact with groundwater, and then ultimately the surface water where the contaminants may end up, and ingestion or again, skin contact with surface water. So then you calculate risks associated with the levels of contaminants finding their way through those pathways and determine how much cleanup is needed. Next slide. As it kind of rehashing here a little bit, the human health risks are related to the soils, chromium, lead, mercury, and arsenic in the soils. In the groundwater, there's chromium that's moved into the groundwater. The PFOS is also a concern. The only contaminant that showed up at high enough levels in the surface water in the creeks is lead. But all of those are being considered in the feasibility study. Next slide. Ecological risks, the levels of chromium and copper and mercury and zinc in the soil are high enough to be a concern for the animals that live in or on the soil. And then the plants and animals and birds, either direct consumption or through the food web, the food chain may accumulate some of these metals to levels of concern. Next slide. So the investigation's been done. The extent of the contamination is characterized, where it's at, how high the levels are, how it's moving through the site. So the next step in the Superfund process is the feasibility study, where EPA and their contractor will look at the alternatives to deal with this contamination. Next slide. Some of the potential remedial actions that may take place for this site, given the elevated contaminants in the soils, that would include excavating, removing, and disposing of those soils off-site. That is probably the most likely action for the soils at this site. Sometimes you reduce the really high levels and then cap over with clean soil. That could play a role here. In situ fixation is when you add something to the soil to bind the contaminant and hold it in place. And then phytoextraction is when you use plant growth to uptake the contaminants into the plant. And then through harvesting the plants, you remove potentially remove the contaminant from the site. But my best guess is that here that you're going to be dealing with excavation and disposal and potentially some capping. Next slide. To deal with the groundwater, oftentimes you'll pump the water out of the ground and run it through a treatment system to treat for the specific contaminant of concern. And that is the most likely solution for lane plating. Sometimes you try to add something into the groundwater, either by pumping it in or by building a wall that the groundwater moves through that will transform the specific contaminant into a different form and allow it to precipitate out and not continue to move through the groundwater. And in some cases, you'll build a wall to block the groundwater on the upstream side of the site so that the groundwater doesn't continue to flow through the site. But again, my best guess for lane plating is that you'll see a pump and treat system to treat the levels of the contaminants in the groundwater to a level below the thresholds, the allowable thresholds. Next slide. So what can I do? When we're involved in a site like this, we want to ask, what can I be doing? My suggestion is stay involved with the process. Ask lots of questions. There is a community group already formed. They have their Facebook page here that if you're interested, you can be a part of that process and follow it there. Also, at this site or others, it's important to be talking to your local representatives, whether it's at the city level, the county level, and the state level, so they understand your concerns. They may not be even aware of the site, but they need to understand the concern and hear it from the community. So with that, that's all I have to share this evening.
Thank you very much, both of you. We now have time for questions and answers. And since I'm already speaking to save time, my question is in regard to lane plating. You were saying about growing things. So what can actually be done if they remove the soil, the process you were talking about, and if things were grown on that land, are they edible?
Yeah, if they remove the contaminated soil and then come back in and add topsoil to the site, if the reuse of that site includes, say, a community garden, that should be an acceptable outcome for that, given that the clean soil, the contaminated soil has been removed and clean soil has replaced it.
Do we have other questions for Hans or Craig?
I have a
Hey, Dan.
question. I have a question.
Ask away.
The site's been around, what, 90 years? I'm just wondering, does anybody monitor this stuff? How does it get cited initially, to prevent this stuff from happening in the future?
Yeah, good question. Obviously, 90 years, there weren't strong environmental laws in place for a long time when this facility was operating. As those environmental laws came into play, different states moved forward at different times, but then the federal government moved in the 70s and 80s with more regulation. And then the oversight became more frequent. So we wouldn't expect this type of scenario to play out again, given our current regulations. And then it took some time for the regulators and the inspectors to catch up with all of the facilities that were out there that had problems. So hopefully we've learned our lesson. We have controls in place moving forward, and that the vast majority of sites with problems have been identified at this time. There still could be issues out there. Say waste were disposed improperly, not documented. Sometimes a site will be developed and an excavation will take place and a tank or multiple tanks will be found. And then you have to deal with the situation as you find it.
How much is federal and how much is state responsibility? It
Yeah.
depends, I guess, on the situation, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I would say primarily it's state-led until the state government really doesn't have the resources to continue to address that site. Then they would pull in the federal government and EPA.
I would add to Hans's previous answer. All the regulatory framework is in place to help prevent these types of issues in the future. I would say the one exception is compounds that are currently legal and not known to be hazardous contaminants. So,
I have a question. How long do you think the remediation process may take? Just a guess for that.
That's a good question. The feasibility study, I would expect to take about a year for this site, and potentially another year for remedial design. And then the action, I would think would be about a year. So you might see about a year process. If the groundwater pump and treat system may need to continue to operate for a number of years after that. But you could see beneficial reuse at that site as soon as 3 years. And sometimes this isn't this is a more streamlined site. It's not as complex as some of the Superfund sites. And if they see a clear path towards excavating the soil and pump and treat, they may be able to fast track it and get it done sooner than 3 years.
Did you have evidence that the air quality was poor around the site?
What I read in the remedial investigation and the human health risk assessment was that the levels in the surface soils are sufficiently high that under certain conditions, wind-blown conditions, people on site, the added risk from inhalation of those particulates is a concern.
Do you, I was gonna give you some information. Do you know what the neighborhood around the site looks like?
I'm not intimately familiar with it, Renee.
I was gonna tell you, it is, it's on a busy street and it's in the middle of a residential neighborhood.
Yeah,
It's also close to Paul Quinn College, isn't it?
Yeah, and my church is behind it.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah. So certainly the closer it is to home, the more concern, and rightfully so. And Renee, again, it sounds like you've been involved, which is the right thing to do, and be communicating your concerns throughout the process.
I think the most important thing with any involvement that you do is to be clear and get facts and not start rumors, that kind of thing, because that tends to make distrust with the community, and then people don't know what to believe. And one of the things we try to do is just get the actual facts. If it's contaminated, it's contaminated, and how far out, how many miles around it, that kind of stuff.
Hans, did you see the question in the chat? I think.
Yes, I'm reading it right now. Yeah, the concern about the PCB contamination in the Clear Fork and West Fork, and what to do about concerns, the Corps of Engineers potentially doing some work in this area, rerouting the river, if with concerns of what that might do with the contamination and enhance its movement or exposure. Finding the right person at TCEQ to talk to, as well as talking again to your local representatives, sharing that concern with them. So they're both here at the regulator, and those who are representing your community should both understand your concerns. And then, as Renee mentioned, the regulator's job is to provide good information and to tell it like it is. Having good data, good science to make the decisions is very important.
Does anyone know who actually owns this land that this site is on?
My understanding, again, from what I've read, that the land ownership was under a different company called Stag Management, which also filed bankruptcy in 2015. So I believe the ownership would revert back to, you know, the local authority. And that's where an opportunity to really have your voice heard on how the site should be reused. That's an opportunity for that community to have a say in that.
Okay, do we have other questions for Hans or Craig?
Dan, this is John Rath. I've got a question.
No, you can't ask anything, John.
I know I'm out of state. I'm out of the area.
Yeah.
Let me try anyway. Thanks a lot for sharing all this stuff. I have a kind of maybe a more macro question. I think about municipal water sources, and particularly with all the infrastructure talk about the terrible municipal water sources across the country. So what I think about are things going into those municipal treatment plants that don't get filtered out. And I'm just, am I concerned over nothing, or can you comment on that particular situation?
Sure, I can comment on it. As Craig mentioned, it's what you don't know that can hurt you sometimes. And the PFOS, PFOA, PFAS compounds have been with us for decades now, going back to the 50s, and in a number of consumer products, and they're found everywhere now. But no one, you know, the general awareness of the health concerns associated with those compounds didn't come about until more recently. But they're already out and about in all of our products, going down the drain and going through the treatment plants to some extent, because those plants aren't designed to remove those types of chemicals. The same with the pharmaceuticals is a growing concern that we hadn't, you know, evaluated previously, but more work is being done now. So that, you know, it's a tough question. The problem is out there. If you talk to the municipality who runs the sewer system and the treatment plant, they're in a tough situation, because they're not producing those chemicals. They didn't design their treatment plant to treat for those chemicals, but they're asked to be part of the problem, and they're asking, hey, let's go back to the sources, the producers, and making sure they're doing their part to solve this problem. So these are, I guess you'd call them wicked problems, and it's going to take a lot of different entities to help solve those. And moving forward, you know, can we be smarter about what products we put out into market, and be sure that we're not creating a problem down the road for the next generation?
Thank you. But right now, if I called my municipal water service, would they tell me what concerns are in the water, what chemicals are in the water that they can't get out?
Another good question, John. They're only required to sample for certain parameters. So they wouldn't. I would think they would be happy to share the information that they have, and that's I would consider publicly available, because what they sample on their wastewater treatment plant, they have to share with the state. So that's public information. But they're not being asked to sample for every parameter under the sun at this time, only the known concerns. So they wouldn't, and states for, again, going to pharmaceuticals or PFOS, PFOA, states are just now asking treatment plants to more regularly sample for PFOS, PFOA, so they can understand the extent of the problem and then make plans on how do we deal with this across the state.
And to really give you an idea of the magnitude of these challenges, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, right, everyone in the Mississippi Basin discharges to the river, almost everyone. And all of that water flows down the river and ends up near New Orleans. And in New Orleans, the drinking water has measurable concentrations of Tylenol, antidepressants, and birth control, because it's all coming in from plants upstream. And like Hans says, it's just, we don't have the tools in place yet to remove them.
What's a good way to dispose of this pharmaceuticals?
Great question.
Yes, cities and hospitals have take back programs. So definitely don't flush them down your drain. You know, the garbage is an option, but see if your community has a place where they'll take back unused pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
I would be surprised if there's not an opportunity to do it in your community.
Yeah, this is John. They regularly have, maybe twice a year, pharmaceutical medicine takebacks by the local police department, I know here.
And I'd like to add to that, any Walgreens, I think CVS does it too, but any Walgreens you go to the pharmacy, they have a lock box and you tell them that you need to throw these meds away. They'll get the key, unlock the box. I've watched them not even take the labels off. And you can dispose of them that way if you don't want to wait around for one of the events.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
John Rath, you need to start worrying about plastics. Plastics are breaking down into smaller and smaller pieces of plastic, molecular size, and we've all got them in our bodies and in our cells. So eventually we'll all be plastic and we won't have to worry about these other contaminants. John?
I'm already ahead of you on that, Dan. And up here in New York, I worry about the fracking waste that they put on icy roads, which we're trying to fix.
Okay, do we have any more questions? I mean, I guess this could go on all night. Anybody?
If we don't have any more questions before you close out, Dan, I would just like to thank both our speakers, Craig and Hans. We really appreciate you. You have an open invitation anytime. Victoria and I would really like to thank you for taking time out of your day to present for us tonight. It was quite informative and we really appreciate it.
Yes,
I'll second that. Thank you.
I found your presentation both interesting and informative
Disheartening.
and troubling.
Yeah.
But it isn't anything we didn't already know, so I guess we're no worse off. Okay, unless there's some other announcements that need to be made, I am going to, are there any other announcements that need to be made?
I don't have anything.
I'm going to close this meeting, and John Rath, I want to ask you a question, if you could stick around, if John Lingenfelder will let us talk just a minute. So as of right now, the
I
meeting
will.
is adjourned, and everybody can go by. Bye-bye.
Happy to
Bye-bye,
be here.
everybody. Thank you for
Take care.
joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Hold it a minute. John Rath?
I'm here.
Hey, I saw that you're associated with an organization called the Mountain Keepers.
Yes.
What is that?
There's called the Catskill Mountain Keepers and the Adirondack Mountain Keepers. They're environmental groups, and And I guess they started out specifically for protection of the Catskills and the Adirondacks and woodlands and hiking trails and things like that. They have expanded into advocacy for the Hudson River and estuaries, as well as kind of the overall energy issues in the state. Fracking, they were a big part of the anti-fracking laws in terms of advocacy and getting the more restrictive laws passed.
Which one of the groups are you affiliated with?
The Catskill Mountain Keeper.
Are you an employee?
Oh, no, I'm just a member. And
Okay.
and they have been active in the most recent is turning back a cement factory on one of the pristine Catskill lakes. Before that, they were key in turning back what do they call it when an impoundment, a huge impoundment of water from one of the reservoirs that's the major feeder into New York City. And they are active in trying to they were very active in shutting down the Indian Point nuclear reactor. So they're pretty active all over the place. But I'm just a member volunteer.
Okay, I just wondered why in the heck you moved to Poughkeepsie.
I do work for an organization that's renewable energy, and it's called the New York Geothermal Energy Organization, and it's a trade group that promotes ground source heat pumps.
Okay.
So Poughkeepsie was it's halfway between Albany and New York City, as you know, where some of the power brokers are. That was the theory.
Okay, well, now I'm up on your activities, so thank you.
Yeah,
And,
thanks for asking.
With that, John.
Well, hey, Dan, how are you? Oh, sorry.
Where are we? Who's checking in? Ryan Baggett.
That's me. You remember?
Were you? Yeah, were you?
Well, I'm up
Okay.
in Colorado for the last 3.5 years. And I saw this come across the meetup and wanted to check in with you and see how you're doing.
Well, me personally or the Dallas Sierra Club?
You, Dallas Sierra Club, if you're still involved with North Texas Renewable Energy Group, if
Yeah.
Mike Renner and Dan Lipinski and all those guys.
Yeah, we're not, things aren't like we would like them to be. Of course, what with the, we can't meet in person. We have to do everything by Zoom. The attendance is not as good. And we aren't making any money because all of our, we made our money off of outings, backpacking trips and camping trips, and we aren't making any money there. So give us some money during North Texas Giving Day.
I could probably do that.
We're trying to raise some money. Things aren't, as good as they could be. But anyway, we're still plugging along, and yeah, we still keep contact with the North Texas Renewable Energy Group.
Okay. Well, how about this? Do you still participate in the tour of solar homes?
No, I don't, because the one year I signed up for that, I had 2 guys come, and that was it, and it took my whole Saturday morning for 2 guys.
I was one of those guys.
Yeah, and then you came to our church.
Yeah.
Later on,
I
I wasn't making that connection until you said it, but
yeah,
I dropped out of that because they weren't coming here. It was too far away, I guess, from the rest of the homes that were being.
Oh man, I had a condo over there in Vitruvian Park at the time, right over off of what's it, Green? Oh heck, right off of Midway,
Yeah.
and I forget the
Green-
cross street that's right there, right in front of the school,
Green Hornet or whatever. Green Hill.
Green Hill.
That's the
Yeah,
name of the school.
that's the name of the school, but what's the name of the shoot? I don't know. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. The cross street
Yeah.
that's right there in front of the school. So Vitruvian Park has some condos over there. So yeah, Miguel and I came by your place, and that was 2015.
Yeah, it's been a
Was-
while.
Yeah. Well,
They never, well, they never asked me again. I don't, maybe they thought, I don't know. Anyhow, I
Well, how
haven't
about-
done that. I did it that one year when you and Miguel came.
okay. How about this?
You were it.
That's disappointing. I sure thought you had a lot more people come by that year. Well, how about this? So I work with Colorado Renewable Energy Group now. That's my little volunteer service. The business outreach and fundraising coordinator. And when I asked them recently, have you ever heard of doing a tour of solar homes? And the oldest member in the group said that IRAC, the Interstate Renewable Energy Commission, had done that like 15 years ago, and it wasn't really well organized. But I thought that the one that you helped out with NTREG did really well. So
Well, yeah, they do. They do it. They've been doing it for quite some years, I think. But anyway,
would you volunteer to talk to our guys and show them how it's done?
who, talk to who?
Colorado Renewable Energy Group. And Dan, they've got 5 chapters, but the ones that I'm involved with are the Boulder chapter where I live, and in the Metro Denver chapter. Yeah. They're shooting.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's carry this discussion on offline.
Okay.
Do you have my email?
I'm not sure that I do, so let me.
Well, if you go to the Dallas Sierra Club's website, you'll see a link to my email, and you can just
I
click
got a
that.
spreadsheet open. Can I just get it right now?
You want me to give it to you?
If you don't mind.
Okay, it's Dan, DAN _ MOULTON
Mhm.
at sbcglobal.net.
Dan _ Moulton, MOULTON at sbcglobal.net. Okay. Well, fantastic.
I don't want to hold up my Zoom
Alrighty.
host any longer, so we're
Okay.
going to say good night. So look forward to hearing from you on the email.
Well, this is our truck, by the way, the Lordstown Endurance, the one that we're taking on the road trip from Denver to Olympia. Ba, ba, da, ba, ba, ba.
Okay.
How's that? All right. Y'all have a good night.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, John, for hanging
You're
in there.
welcome. Good night. And good
Good
night,
night.
John and
Night.
Dan.